President-elect Donald Trump announced this week that he would sign an executive order instituting a 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican goods on his first day in office in January. Mexico will retaliate in response to U.S. tariffs. Canada is weighing its options. The Washington Post writes that proposed tariffs could have a, quote, seismic effect, end quote, changing the playing field for local producers and other nations that trade with the U.S. They could also result in retaliatory tariffs against U.S. businesses. Details are not known, but cross-border tea ventures with a large U.S. customer base could suffer in the highly competitive U.S. tea market. Montreal-based wholesaler Metropolitan Tea has a sizable U.S. client list, and David's Tea, also based in Montreal, retails to many U.S. consumers. Shabnam Weber, president of the Tea and Herbal Association of Canada, told TBiz, quote, "It's a big number. Nobody was prepared for that. All of the economists have been speculating on 10%, which would result in market contraction of our GDP anywhere between 1 and 5%. That's a really big deal. I think there are tea companies that will definitely be hurt, but in the grand scheme, we don't export a lot of tea to the U.S., end quote. Through September 2024, the U.S. exported 15.5 million kilos of tea to Canada, a 40% increase compared to the same period in 2023. Value increased by 10% to $77.5 million during the period, January through September. In 2019, the U.S. exported $130 million worth of tea to Canada, a 5-year high. Tea exports to Canada were $96 million in 2023, continuing a downward trend. Quote, "Most of our teas are either packed in the U.S. or the U.K., and the U.S. is the biggest. So if we reciprocate as we did on steel and aluminum in 2018, that's going to cause a big ripple. That's the bigger concern," end quote, said Weber. Canada is the 17th largest importer of tea in the world, importing $138 million in 2022. According to Statista Market Insights, the market is estimated at $1.72 billion, of which $1.22 billion is out of home. The OECD lists India as the second largest trading partner with $19.6 billion in trade. The UK is third with $17 million. China is fourth with $12.8 million, and Japan ranks fifth at $10.5 million. High tariffs will dampen sales by Canadian tea exporters to the U.S., but a retaliatory tariff on U.S. imports would likely lead Canadian consumers to choose new suppliers from secondary trading partners, especially India, the UK, and China. Kenya appointed a 21-member task force to dispose of 100 million kilos of unsold tea quickly. The tea is valued at approximately 32 billion shillings. That's $250 million in U.S. dollars. Agricultural Cabinet Secretary Andrew Karanja instructed the public-private tea stakeholders to investigate the underlying causes and propose short- and long-term solutions. Low sales result from favorable weather, government-imposed auction minimum prices, logistical disruptions tied to the ongoing Red Sea crisis, inept factory management, unfair supply chain policies, and unscrupulous brokers engaged in what has been described as unethical practices. Small growers receive monthly payments based on the amount of tea they harvest, but do not earn a year-end bonus on unsold tea. Deputy President Kithure Kindiki promised to, quote, correct the market misfortunes affecting tea farmers. Their livelihoods depend on our actions, end quote, he said. The surplus is carried over from 2 harvest years and far exceeds normal stocks that total 40 million kilos globally. The unprecedented quantity is overflowing factories and warehouses in Mombasa and producing regions. Kenya annually harvests about 600 million kilos of tea from green leaf plucked by 800,000 tea farmers. The surplus has also affected auction prices that remain well below the government's suspended minimum reserve price of $2.43 per kilo. Kenya tea is currently selling well below neighboring Rwanda, where auction prices top $4 per kilo. The task force, chaired by Nicholas Bunyikaga, was empowered with regulatory authority, policy assessment, and recommendations for a plan of action. Its 14 members and 6-member secretariat were also tasked with a performance review of the Kenya Tea Development Agency, KTDA, factories. The task force has 60 days to submit findings. The United Nations closed the somewhat fractious COP29 climate conference in Baku, Azerbaijan, with developed countries agreeing to contribute $300 billion annually to developing countries by 2035. The sum is $200 billion greater than the $100 billion per year pledged in 2009. When combined with private fund pledges, developing countries could receive $1.3 trillion in assistance. The conference was largely dominated by financial negotiations centered on providing developing countries with funds to mitigate climate change impacts. Several tea-producing countries in East Africa and Asia qualify for assistance. Inger Anderson, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, praised delegates for securing a, quote, foundation on which we must now rapidly build. However, we must be clear, ambition and promises are only as good as the action and delivery that backs them up, end quote. During the conference, scientists predicted that 2024 would be the hottest year in the past 125,000 years on Earth. Average temperatures exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in 2024. Failure to control emissions could increase temperatures by 2.6 to 3.1 degrees Celsius this century, with disastrous results. Delegate countries must cut emissions by 42% by 2030 to limit warming, according to the 2024 edition of the UN's Emissions Gap Report. The 2-week event was attended by 70,000 world leaders, negotiators, observers, and activists. It is the second largest COP gathering after COP28 in Dubai, UAE. President-elect Donald Trump announced that the U.S. would withdraw from the Paris Accords prior to the event, but no other nation said the same.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.